Good evening, dear participants. Good morning, Dr. Michael. Good afternoon, Ms. Amy. Welcome to our learning session number 9 for the year 2023. I'm a chair of Knowledge Task Force of Mongolian Evaluation Association. Mongolian Evaluation Association was established in 2021 with a vision to promote professionalization and institutionalization of evaluation at national level. Our today's guests are Dr. Michael and the PhD candidate, Ms. Amy, as speakers. Today's presentation topic is Quality as Praxis, a tool for formative meta-evaluation. Meta-evaluation is discussed in the evaluation literature as an ethical and professional imperative for evaluators. In this session, we will review various forms of meta-evaluation and discuss one approach for engaging in formative meta-evaluation practice as independent evaluators. So let me introduce our today speakers. Dr. Michael is Director and Assistant Professor in the Interdisciplinary Ph.D. in Evaluation Program at Western Michigan University and editor of the Journal of Multidisciplinary Evaluation. He leads research on improving understanding of evaluation quality, including a systematic review of meta-evaluation practice reporting, a study of American Evaluation Association's members' evaluation quality perspectives, and a study of how evaluators define research on evaluation in conference proposals. Ms. Amy is a PhD candidate in Western Michigan University's Interdisciplinary PhD in Evaluation Program. She has worked in the international development sector for over 20 years and has conducted independent evaluations for the United Nations, private donors, and bilateral donors, primarily in Asia and the Middle East for over 15 years. From 2014 till 2018, she served as assistant professor in the Sustainable Development Master's Degree Program at School for International Training Graduate Institute in Washington, D.C. Her research interests include the professionalization and internationalization of evaluation practice. So today's presentation will take around 30-40 minutes, and we have the rest 20 minutes for questions and answers part. Now I would like to invite Dr. Michael to give us the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. I see that we have some people continuing to stream in, so we'll get started and maybe a slow burn start so we can allow people to get settled in. I'm going to be sharing my screen for both Amy and I to present from. So I will start the presentation here and get my slides up. See if I can go straight to PowerPoint here and send it up to the screen like so. Does that look right to you, Amy?
Yes, that looks great.
You want to kick us off? I think we decided you were going to go ahead and, or did I say I was going to kick us off? Go ahead.
Sure. Why don't you move to the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
So we're here to talk today about meta-evaluation, and we'd like to present about various forms of meta-evaluation and what meta-evaluation means. Michael will begin our presentation talking about both a theory and practice of meta-evaluation and what it means for building quality in one's work. We will then take questions after Michael presents, more questions that are specific to that material. And then the latter half of the presentation, I will then review a tool that we had developed as part of an evaluation that we conducted. And then we will end with further questions as well and more interactive dialogue. Yeah, Michael, why don't you?
Okay, sure thing. So I think it's important always in these kind of conversations to set the stage on some key definitions to make sure we're all on the same page. And for that reason, we decided we would start with defining evaluation itself, because as you know, meta evaluation is really that next step up where you're evaluating evaluation. So what does it mean to evaluate first? And then we can move into the actual meta evaluation itself. So the key definition that most of us play accept as a standard is by Michael Scriven some time ago. Gosh, we're going on 30 years now, back to his thesaurus on evaluation. And as you can see, it's right here, the act or process of determining the merit, worth, or significance of something, or the product of that process. And so let's break that down just a little bit so we make sure we are understanding the key terms within this. So we're talking about the act or the process. Evaluation is the doing, right? Or the product of it. Of what? And that is determining the merit is the first thing. And these are the key terms here. When we're looking at merit, we're looking at whether or not something is intrinsically good, of some sort of value. We're looking at itself. Is it a good iteration of whatever it is we're looking at? Is the program that you're evaluating doing the things it's supposed to do? Is it meritorious? And so you start with the beginning of this. In this definition, we start at the goodness of something. And it's usually independent of the context within which it is being evaluated. So it's by itself, standalone, is it doing what it's supposed to do? Then as we expand the definition, it goes a little bit further out from the center of merit, but worth. So considering where it is, how it is, how it is being done, whether other things like it are available, is it worth the investment that you're putting into it? So is it good first? And then is it a good thing, a good iteration of this thing? So if we think about evaluating a particular program on maybe vitamin uptake, whether people take the right vitamins, first we'll look whether or not it is actually getting it done. Are more people taking those vitamins? And then we ask its worth. Is this program getting more people to take their vitamins than, say, another program similar to it, but that might require more resources? So is this one doing it, better for less, right? So that's the worth part of it. So we're moving through this iteration of definitions into significance. And this one gets a lot softer because this one, again, it's a little bit further out from the merit, the worth, and the significance. But now we're asking whether or not people care about it. Does it really meet the needs of the population? And so it's the furthest and the deepest, and often where people start the work, even though they probably need to start over here on the merit side. But we often think about whether or not you are meeting the needs of the people, that the intention of the program more broadly than just merit itself, right? So it's importance, and that's what's significant. So this is a key definition in evaluation that is at the core of what we do. We often also think about embedded in here is questions of goodness, who gets to decide what's good, where are the value sets, and all of that sits within the sphere of evaluation. So, that is one very small definition, a very simple definition. When it gets expanded and used and evolved in other places, there are some additional components that we think about in standards. And so the Joint Committee on Standards for Educational Evaluation in the US, which was established way back in the 70s, they have put forward a number of publications around evaluation standards. And one of their key sets of standards that many work by in evaluation is the standards for educational, the program evaluation standards that the Joint Committee have put out. In 2010 was their third edition of the Joint Committee standards on educational evaluation. program evaluation standards. And in their early part of their writing on page 15, they expand the definition of evaluation to add a few more important components. So you might notice that the first bullet here pretty much says what was on that previous slide, right? The investigation of the quality of programs. And you can think of quality as being merit, value, worth, significance. But then the Joint Committee breaks it out and reminds us the fact that when we do evaluation, it's not just about quality, it's for a purpose, right? It's for that some sort of purpose. And here they break it out into lots of potential purposes of evaluation. But it's important to think about when we do evaluation, we are thinking about its purpose. It's usually driven to answer some important questions. And so you've got your purpose there as part of the definition here. And then the potential impact of doing good evaluation is this third bullet, which is leading to improvement or accountability in the user's programs and systems. So you've got an outcome intention of evaluation. And in fact, you have even a long-term impact, which is we hope that it will contribute to organizational or social value. Right, so evaluation has all of this embedded in the definition of evaluation. So that's an important level setting for us, I think, is this idea that evaluation is about improvement, it's about judgment. It's hopefully at the bottom, the bottom line is it's also about social betterment, social value. So that's a level setting of evaluation definition that we think about, at least in our work, and certainly in our program that Amy is a part of here at Western Michigan University. These are the kind of things that we talk about. We talk about evaluation itself as a definition of what we do. So now that we've laid out a definition that we can all, we hope that everyone can agree upon on evaluation itself, let's define meta evaluation. And I said it earlier on that meta evaluation really is that stepping up, that evaluating evaluation, or evaluating evaluation. And so the very core of it is that we are doing just that. We are thinking about how one evaluates. In meta evaluation, the core concept here is that there is some evaluative tool or some mechanism or process, but by its very nature, it has judgments embedded in it. We talked about it. You're doing some merit, worth, or significance, and that judgment, that process, that logic itself should be questioned. It's you are evaluating something. You're making some sort of judgment, hopefully a very informed judgment. But it doesn't mean that judgment, by its very nature, is good. The process, the product of that judgment should be queried and tested and investigated. And that is what meta evaluation does for us. It asks us to think about our own evaluation, to say, how are we doing it? How well are we doing it? Is it appropriate? Where is it good? Where can it be improved? That is the idea right behind meta evaluation. It's a long-standing idea, at least in the big scheme of things. I mean, certainly there's a lot longer standing ideas in the world, but from our perspective, 1969, Michael Scriven came up with this idea that said, yes, we're evaluating, but who's evaluating evaluation? Who's looking over our shoulder? We have to walk the talk. We have to get out there and actually ask people to look at what we do, to make sure we're doing the kind of work that they expect us to do. And so the idea of meta evaluation, you might be able to imagine, has both a practical and a theoretical component to it. Just like evaluation is often thought of as being very practical, but also we can do research on it, and it serves the idea of thinking about evaluation, so too meta evaluation. There is a methodological perspective, which is we are evaluating evaluations. We are doing practical work that is useful for decision making, so they have understanding of the strength of the kind of concepts and judgments that are embedded in that evaluation. And so there is this methodological function of saying, practical function to say, are we doing good evaluation? And so we often think about this as meta evaluation practice, as a meta evaluation as practice. But at the same time, once you do that kind of work where you are evaluating some evaluation, it automatically, for those of us who are in the realm of thinking about, more thoughtfulness about what we do, it also then offers us the ability to think more broadly about the idea of evaluation. So by evaluating a set of evaluations or a singular evaluation, it leads the opportunity, it gives you the opportunity to think about, well, how does that reflect upon what we do more generally in evaluation? So from that perspective, meta evaluation also has this, gives you or is a tool to do research on evaluation. So you can actually think about how well evaluation is being done more locally, and it gives you the kind of content you need to think about it more globally. So how does this set of evaluations and the way it's being done, how does it then lead us, allow us to think about more generally how evaluation is being done, more the theorizing about it and research on evaluation. So meta evaluation has both the practical and a theoretical perspective embedded in it. As I mentioned, it's been around for a little while, and it's been thought of meta evaluation as a professional imperative. Scriven and others have said, look, we just have to do this. If we are going to do and be judged as set aside and say, oh, he's the evaluator, she's the evaluator, they're the evaluators, who then is making sure that they are doing really good work? So that's that professional imperative. We practice what we preach. We do this, and then we ask others to do it to us because we're doing it to you. So we're evaluating you. Well, we should be asking somebody to evaluate us as well. Because in fact, if we don't continue to do that, we have, Dale Larson has done this very nice job in his quality book of saying, if we don't look at the quality systems, the systems that we have in place around quality, if we don't interrogate them on a regular basis, they will fall prey to the same thing of all other systems, which they will become kind of just a checklist. Oh, we're just going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and they'll lose their edge. They won't be as sharp as we need them to be. If we don't continually look at our work, it will fall prey to being a little bit easier, what's the word I'm looking for, done without thoughtfulness. Right, and that's the piece that we're talking about here with meta evaluations, making sure that evaluation work is done thoughtfully. So when we think about what how meta evaluation can be practiced, it's much like evaluation in that there's many faces of meta evaluation. There are lots of ways to think about how meta evaluation can be done. So this is just an easy screen here to talk about all sorts of ways that meta evaluation could be practiced. It could be, the target could be almost any meta evaluation. It could be a policy, it could be personnel, it could be a program evaluation. All of those are potential targets for meta evaluation. It could focus on, meta evaluation can focus on the design phase of an evaluation. Oh, look at my evaluation plan. Please tell me if I'm hitting all the marks that I should. Right. So the focus could be on the design, the implementation. It could be on your outcome, your results themselves. The scope of meta evaluation can vary, just like evaluation. It could be on a single evaluation tool. It could be as big as looking at a meta evaluation system. I recently did a meta evaluation of the Doctors Without Borders for the Swedish evaluation unit, and we looked at 5 years worth of evaluations and the processes themselves, the system within which they do their evaluation, and we looked at so it ended up being 31 different evaluations and all of their documentation and processes therein. So the scope can go from very simple to very complex, very broad. And it happens in almost any discipline or domain. We see meta evaluation taking place in computers, in computer science, where they're looking at evaluation algorithms of, say, natural language processing, and they're doing meta evaluation of evaluation algorithms, all the way out to international development. We see an awful lot of meta evaluation in international development, where they're looking at the kinds of evaluations that are being done. And positionality is an important component to think about when you're talking about meta evaluation. Is, are we talking about people in, you can have someone on your team doing your own meta evaluation, or you can have an external person looking at it. So what is the position of the meta evaluator? And the role could also be, we often think of summative evaluations. We can also think of summative meta evaluation. Or we can also think of formative meta evaluation. Is it for improvement purposes, or is it for a judgment purpose? And likewise, we often think about the timing of meta evaluation can occur at the early stage, where you're looking at something in advance of what you're about to do, which is a little bit about what we'll show you today. Or you can be in a meta evaluative position concurrently with the evaluation, where they're dipping in at different moments to see how well you're doing as an evaluation. Or certainly at the end, you could be looking backward and doing a retrospective meta evaluation. All of these things occur in the sphere of meta evaluation, depending on lots of different ideas. Okay, so let's just pause for a moment to see if there's anything before I jump into the how. A couple of pieces to talk about of how meta evaluation takes place. Is there anything at all that that I've said so far that has made you want to dig in for a moment before we go on? All right. Well, we have some.
Hello?
Oh, yes.
Hi, can I ask the question?
Yeah, this is an okay time for a question. Sure.
Okay. Thank you so much. How can I elaborate it? At whose initiative is meta evaluation is done?
Yeah. So I think you're getting at, the commissioner or the initiator, right? Who decides that a meta evaluation is going to be done? This varies tremendously across the field. In the middle of our systematic review, one of the early questions we ask when you're reviewing a meta evaluation report, is there any indication of who's asking this project to be meta evaluated, or who's asking for it? It varies tremendously from, internally, if a project, an evaluator has enough of bandwidth to ask for the help, they often do some internal meta evaluation requests where an evaluator might ask a colleague to look in on what they're doing. And then you can see that some commissioners will see that this evaluation, or right now, there is a USAID project looking at long-term evaluation. So they're looking at evaluations, looking back at longer-term programming and trying to evaluate those long-term evaluations. They don't have a meta evaluation request for that. And so they're putting out an RFP to actually see if one can be hired to look in on those. So oftentimes commissioners will see the value of meta evaluation and request outside support on that. The Doctors Without Border project, it actually was the evaluation manager knew that she wanted a review of their work to help inform and improve the work they do. And so she got her reporting structure above her to fund and agree to commission a meta evaluation that would look across their work. So it really depends. It's commissioned by many different perspectives, and all of those lead to questions of design and positionality of how to go about the work. But a very good question. Good. I'm going to move on to the how to do evaluations, meta evaluations, so we can continue and move this presentation in. So I just want to talk about personal and professional positionality a little bit as well as to where we see meta evaluation sits in our thinking about the work that we do. And the interesting part of quality, this is a piece that is challenging. This is something I sit in with my research, is where we as evaluators have to think about the work that we do and the quality of our work. And a number of authors have really lent their voice to the idea around quality for how we could think about quality in our practice as evaluators. And one of the main ways of thinking about this goes way back to Aristotle's work that Schwant and Baylor Larson have brought us to think about, is this idea that in the practice of doing evaluation, we learn a lot about what is good and what should be, what clients will value. And it's in this space of client interaction, understanding, judgments and understanding how to build arguments, sits this idea that the practice itself of working with clients, building instruments, collecting data, interacting on interpretation, and to build judgments is in this practical perspective of quality. It is in this space where you are working with others that quality is molded and melded. And so that's what these pieces, these bullets are talking about here, is because we are in the space of doing evaluation, the role is set on us to help refine and define what good is. Often our clients don't know how to define good, and our role in that space is to help them understand and define and explicate, like pull it out and really listen to and co-create a quality, a goodness space. And so we're often asked, we often need to be thoughtful in that space to make sure that we are answering these questions of, are we doing good work? Can we defend our work as being good? And so that's where quality sits in general when we are thinking about the work that we're doing, and when we're doing meta evaluation and evaluation as it is, we are in that space of defining quality ourselves. Oftentimes, instruments are developed for us, and oftentimes we have to develop instruments to define quality. And it's in that practice that we are positioning our conversation today. It's often that when we do talk about the quality of something, we have standards and principles that help us get to those definitions. We have talked a little bit about the Joint Committee standards on program evaluation, on educational evaluation, in particular the program evaluation. And those are often the go-to pieces for us, that we like checklists, we like standards, we like to look at something to help us refine what quality is. And it's important to know that those standards are interpretable by those of us in practice. So we found that some people out there are using standards as checklists. Some people are using standards as just, ways to think about the work that they do. And there are ways to think about this as being the quality of our work as being obvious in it, like it is intrinsically good because we've worked really hard at putting good methods in place. So yes, as evaluators, we can say we worked really hard to make sure that what we created is good and answers the questions that you've asked. While as we've also found in my research a few years back that evaluators often look at it in almost a mirror perspective, which is did we do good work, and do our clients see it as good work? So we have this intrinsic value of, yes, it's good because we worked really hard, we know what good is, and we can say that this is good. And then the other side of it is, because we work in an economic place where work we do as evaluators is a market good, we have to know that our clients, in fact, see it as good. So we have this extrinsic value, extrinsic quality is, does our client see that as quality, right? And so we sit in that space as evaluators to build tools that are intrinsically quality work that then are respected by and serve the needs of the clients that we are engaged with. So it's an interesting space to be in, of trying to do good work that also is seen as good as well. And so Bob Picciotto, very interesting theorist and writer, was with World Bank for 30 years doing evaluation work. And he writes quite a bit about the market perspective of evaluation. This is where you all sit. I'm an academic. I get to sit a little bit far from this, but I see it very deeply. You are out there practicing in the field as evaluators, and you work in that economic sphere where the work that you do is for hire. You're often told what your systems, the instruments and the tools that you will use. You've got all of these things are kind of built into the contracting that you've worked in, and in that alone, you are in a power struggle over, and you could be in a difficult power struggle over what is good and what should be good for this particular program or policy versus what your client says is good and what they're paying you to do, right? So you're in this space, and our occupation, our discipline of evaluation has to, as we do with the, knowing how disciplines develop, is that it's clear that until we work out this power differential of economics, gun for hire or a evaluator for hire, versus how to build good quality tools and do good quality evaluation work, and that manage between those two pieces of power, as we flow through this and figure it out, it is where what we have to do before we become a discipline. So that's what meta evaluation, I think, but what Amy and I have been doing here is we've been working in this space of trying to build more tools and more knowledge structures about evaluation and meta evaluation, so that we have more refined language and tools, so that when we go into these power situations where we're discussing contracts, we have a discipline worth of literature and tools behind us to inform that space. And so I'll pause here for a moment before Amy walks us through the tools that we've been working on. So I haven't heard any questions yet, so why don't we,
Okay.
or you can pause a little longer if you'd like.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. I'd like to speak a bit to formative meta-evaluation. Michael was going over various types of meta-evaluation and mentioned timing that is a factor in the various kinds. And so we often think about formative evaluation versus summative evaluation. And we also would have formative meta-evaluation and then summative meta-evaluation, which happens during and then at the end, respectively. In the literature, in the evaluation literature, there's quite a bit of discussion about the importance of both, and about meta-evaluation broadly, as Michael has talked about. But we don't know too much about formative meta-evaluation. It's quite clear that in practice and in the literature, summative meta-evaluation is discussed more and it's practiced more. And we often see that summative meta-evaluation is done often within that economic exchange, that contractual relationship. It's often done externally to the evaluation team. And that may look like an assessment that is done that may be outsourced by the commissioner or donor to a third party who may then be making that assessment as to how well has this evaluation been conducted. Oftentimes, that information is not really privy to the evaluation team, or at least in my experience. Formative meta-evaluation, we are distinguishing this positionality of internal versus external. And so internal formative meta-evaluation is referencing what is happening within the evaluation team itself. At the formative meta-evaluation point, then looking at, as you are planning the evaluation and designing it and moving through it and implementing it, what are ways internally that the evaluation team is doing or can do to build quality in their work. And this is what we mean by formative meta-evaluation, and specifically what we mean by internal formative meta-evaluation. Next slide, Michael. So as Michael mentioned, we have an experience that we want to share that led us to develop an approach or a tool, or you could even call it a checklist as well. The context for this was a rather complex evaluation. The complexity involved the scope, which was international, the number of layers within the implementation of the program, which was focused on human trafficking. And these layers involved a predominant bilateral donor in our world, who had then funded a foundation. And that foundation then put out an RFP and then funded grants, programs in India and Bangladesh. So we were working on 3 different continents, the UK, the US, and South Asia, and looking at how, you know, the value and the significance and the merit of these programs on the ground, as well as all the way going up in terms of how the donor was conceptualizing these programs and how that fit into its own objectives. So it was quite expansive, quite large in scope. And we were a third party contracted by the donor to design and implement evaluative exercises, which took shape as a baseline, a formative evaluation, and a summative evaluation, or often what's referred to as a midterm evaluation and a final evaluation, or end term. The donor had a summative quality assurance process in place, implemented by yet another party, as I mentioned, which is often common. But yet we were eager, we were wanting to be very deliberate in how we were participating in quality assurance and building our own quality assurance as we went. As we went along, we wanted to be very deliberate, and we wanted to work to sort of discuss with our client, with our commissioner, the issues around quality, and have a voice in that conversation, and not simply have a summative assessment done. Next slide, please. So we decided that in our effort to be deliberate, we wanted to then develop an approach. We thought about it in phases: a design phase, a design/implementation phase, and a reflection phase. And the design implementation phase, that second phase of the three, sort of indicates how iterative the tool is. It sort of moves back and forth. And we thought that was quite important as part of a reflective practice approach. We put this on an Excel sheet, and we had various or multiple columns. Next slide, Michael. And we articulated questions for each phase. The design phase: what are the critical moments that we anticipate? What evaluation standards and principles are relevant to each of those critical moments? And then what should be done, when, how, and with whom? And what is my desired outcome of those actions that we will take? And then the reflection piece: were those desired outcomes achieved, and were standards met as we define them? Next slide. So in our Excel sheet, we had 10 columns, and for each of those columns, we had headings. And each of them then fell into those three parts of 3 phases. So the design phase is sort of the contextual element of our work, that critical moment, which you might see is pretty central to the tool. Defining that and reflecting on it is something that we engaged in for quite some time during that design piece. And it was also based on experience as we went, and we realized, as we got into the evaluation and designing it, which was a 5-month inception phase that we were going through, that various issues were coming up, and we were then more clearly identifying what those critical moments were. And for each of those, then, what are the evaluation standards that were applicable to those critical moments? We were using the UK, United Kingdom evaluation standards. We were also using ethical guidance that was also published by our commissioning agency. So 2 pieces then in terms of, well, what is relevant here to look at? How do we interpret our critical moment in terms of quality? What do we look at? Both standards and then ethics and principles that are relevant. Our next piece as part of the design phase was understanding the level of importance. How important is this to the evaluation? Is it critical for its success? Not so critical? Is this particular moment of extrinsic gravity, meaning how important is this to our commissioner or to any other stakeholder involved? Of intrinsic gravity, how important is it to us as an evaluation team? So we wanted to distinguish between that, and we wanted to also, in terms of rating that, we just simply used a simple scale of low, medium, and high. For our design and implementation, this is where, okay, this is what we need to do. This is what we plan to do. These are the questions that we have. These are the actions that we will take. And this is what we hope will happen as a result of that. And then the last phase, the reflection, and what was actually realized. Let's reflect as a team, as an evaluation team, on what happened with regard to each of those critical moments that we had identified. And that was a practice that we, as an evaluation team, we also brought Michael in as a facilitator to work with us on that. So it can be done internally by the team lead and very participatory. It can also be facilitated to support participation. And this, as you might see also, there's a lot of, as I said, it's very iterative. It sort of goes forward and backwards as you move through the evaluation, and you may then have a multiple sheets on your Excel file that consists of notes and reflections, and what you're creating here, or what we found was that this was very useful information, very useful data, not only for our aim to build quality assurance, to build quality into our work, and to discuss with our commissioner issues around quality. But it also gave us a bit more breadth and more depth to how we talk about our methods. It became a means for adding a bit more information, a bit more means for justifying our methods and talking about what actually we did as an evaluation team, and thus then giving more validity to our work. Next slide.
Before we go on to the next slide, let's, sorry, did I just pull us out? We do have a couple of questions. Let me, so the one thing I would like to, before I answer the question, maybe I'll answer the question in my little note I wanted to add to what Amy was talking about, is up here in this critical moment and the standards and so columns A through E, the question, we would think about a particular piece that's going to perhaps come up for us. So we're thinking about, okay, the evaluation standards help us think about how we're going to judge our evaluation around quality, propriety, feasibility, utility, or not quality, but accuracy, and so on, right? There's these standards, and thinking about those then brought up questions. Okay, well, our client will probably be interested in how we handled this standard around, say, accuracy of judgments. And so then it goes to question, or D, degree of extrinsic gravity. Well, is our client really going to find that to be important? Or are they just going to want to have enough information to feel comfortable that we did the work that we're supposed to do, right? So it was a interplay between A and E, if you will. All of those is to think about the standards that we would be being able to attribute our work to these standards, and what kind of moments along the way in the evaluation might come up that would give us an opportunity to play out and answer and address those standards, right? So it's the critical moments often come up through reflection of the future, like what are we getting ourselves into? What is this? Who's going to be at the table? What kind of interactions with stakeholders are we going to have when we go out in the field? One of the key ones we'll see on a future slide is the multicultural nature of the team, multiple languages, multiple time zones. How does that play into quality, and how might we run into critical moments along the way that we'll have to address because of this particular issue? And so that is a little bit of an example or a drawing out of what do we mean by critical moment. It could be a point in time, it could be a concept, it could be a critical component of the evaluation. We use critical moment as a title, mostly to just remind us that there will be moments in time when we're going to have to look at a standard and call it out as to how well we did on it, right? So that's what we mean by that. And Amy, do you want to address the other question about the example of the UK program evaluations? I mean, there's the UNEG, United Nations Evaluation Group standards. I think DFID has, or maybe DFID rolled up.
Yeah.
Didn't DFID rebuild themselves into a new program in the UK government? I think I just saw that recently.
They did. DFID is no longer. They're now FCDO.
Right.
foreign
commerce or something like that.
Foreign Commonwealth Development Organization, perhaps. Yes, I think I cannot list them off the top of my head now, since it's been several years, but largely the evaluation standards are quite commonly shared across associations, across donors, and they, as Michael has sort of indicated, they are often listed as feasibility, utility, help me, Michael, accuracy, thank you.
Propriety, yeah.
Propriety.
And then evaluation. And then the fifth one that they added in the last iteration in 2010 was evaluation accountability. So essentially, meta evaluation is what we like to call the fifth one, meta evaluation, because we're looking at accountability of our work. So that's called out now as a standard. And as Amy said, most of the evaluation organizations around the world, not all of them, but many of them have turned to these set of 4 or now 5 facets of quality for their to promote them in their organization's use of standards. Yeah. So that's any other, let's see, you want to go anything else on this one before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I think it might also be if we get into the example, I think that will perhaps make more clarity and bring more questions as well. So this is a very crazy busy slide that essentially gives some definition to each of those headings. So as the critical moment at the column A, we defined as the central issue or moment in the evaluation expected to involve decision making, an issue that we foresee or anticipate, and thinking about the standards and thinking about the principles and referring to them very early on in the design phase also helped us think about those critical moments and what they might be within the work that we were about to do. So it's very sort of circular, and it's iterative, and you sort of, as you are starting getting into the work, those critical moments appear. And there may be, even when you're implementing, we would foresee that maybe, here's another critical moment that we could have defined. We may have been able to anticipate, but we didn't. Let's add that. And then think about, well, what are we going to do now for this? But let's move to the next slide, where for the example that we're discussing, this international bilateral donor funded program evaluation, we were an international evaluation team. So I was leading the team from the US. I had a team member from Turkey. I had another team member based in the UK. I had a director who was based in the UK. I had another member who was based in Bangladesh, and another based in India. So there was a complexity, an obvious complexity there with culture, working internationally, different time zones. How do we communicate effectively? Use of language, use of technology, and focused on a very complex socioeconomic problem. So one critical moment we identified as working as a multicultural and international evaluation team on a complex socioeconomic problem. And this, as you can see in degree of extrinsic gravity that we determined, we thought that was, for our commissioner, we thought it was sort of everyday sort of work, that maybe their concerns were not focused on this piece. But for us as an evaluation team, we considered that to be a high level of gravity. we felt that this was very important to address in terms of how all of us as team members relate to this problem of human trafficking. How do we think about it? What is our positionality with vis-a-vis this complex social issue on the other side of the world, or for some of us within very close and within our own cultures. You may note that it's a very large critical moment, and that's true. When we articulated this during the design phase, this is how we articulated it, going through, and thinking further as we were progressing. We might have chosen to break that down. It may have become 2 or 3 critical moments as we went along, as we sort of realized the depth of that and how, oh, let's articulate it in this way. It's a little bit more accurate now in terms of what we're experiencing. But this is how we began. And this is what we were really, one of our main concerns going forward. And this related to the program standards of accuracy and validity. We were concerned about conducting a high quality evaluation that was accurate and valid. We also looked at principles of integrity with regard to our positionalities and how we worked together as a team, competence, accountability, and honesty. So this was really quite reflective on each of us as a team, and how we were going to come together and talk about this issue and understand it, interpret it, and all of that work then leading toward then the development of our data collection instruments, how we were focusing our areas of inquiry, and our analysis of our data and how we interpreted that. So our questions: what are our individual orientations with respect to the program we are examining? I mean, it's as I mentioned, just the complexity around economics, around gender, with on this issue, around the fact that we were all from different cultures, the fact that this was a conceptualized program on one side of the world being implemented in Bangladesh and India. We wanted to then develop a process to enable reflection for us as a team in nurturing our own awareness, and as Tom Schwandt calls, our knowledge of self. And that sort of relates back to that phronesis, that term that Michael referenced of Aristotle, which is sort of cultivating that practical reasoning and that practical judgment that we acknowledge as part of building quality in our work. Our desired outcome then was a process undertaken that assists the team in exploring understanding and biases, and which contributes toward our approach then to data collection and analysis. So this gives an example that I hope helps to illustrate. As you can see, this might be just one sheet within an Excel file. There might be other sheets that you want to then develop to take notes and to further reflect on these and further revise as one gets further into the evaluation process. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. I see one question from Hanan.
Right. So, right, program evaluation standard mentioned here is designed for or selected during the inception phase, right?
Yes.
So yes, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, because we were working for a donor in the UK, we were looking at the standards developed by the UK Evaluation Association. and also the standards that are mentioned in the materials of that donor, of that commissioning agency. So we did a little homework in terms of, well, what is the context of our commissioning agency with regard to these standards? Internationally accepted standards. Michael, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I kind of responded to it in the text. There isn't really an internationally accepted standards. I mean, we say that the Joint Committee standards on educational evaluations, program evaluation standards. We often say that these are about as close as we get to internationally accepted standards for evaluation. And that tells us that that's what quality evaluation should be rated against, is these standards. And so often what you see then in meta-evaluation practice is that one starts with those standards because they're pretty well accepted internationally as quality indicators for evaluation. So meta-evaluation, in the systematic review that we're doing, we're seeing many of the meta-evaluations are using that as at least one set of standards against which to rate their evaluand, whatever they're meta-evaluating. But what we often see is that they add to that some sort of framework, quality framework, that is relevant in that discipline or that domain. So when we did our meta-evaluation for Doctors Without Borders, we started with the program evaluation standards, and then we used the ALNAP humanitarian standards for quality interventions in humanitarian, because Doctors Without Borders works in medical humanitarian, right? So we added that level on top of the program evaluation standards. And then we used also the UNEG standards, United Nations Evaluation Groups standards for evaluation. And then on top of that, we used a locally developed evaluation values manifesto that the actual evaluation units in the Medicine Sans Frontiers or Doctors Without Borders, they have their own values framework. So we used all of these in the meta evaluation to really bolster our statements, our claims of quality about their processes and their products. So it really comes down to that's probably the closest one gets to internationally accepted standards for quality and evaluation, is the Joint Committee's program evaluation standards. And so they are often turned into tools for meta evaluation.
Right. I think in from a formative viewpoint and more specifically an internal formative perspective, internal to the evaluation team, such as the tool that we're sharing today, in deciding on those standards and principles. I mean, one thing that I think is constructive and a positive move really is for the evaluation team to engage with the commissioner and say, well, we're developing our formative meta evaluation approach, and we understand that there will be a summative meta evaluation conducted of our work. What are the standards that will be used for that summative meta evaluation exercise? So as to begin that conversation, and then to adopt or to use and as part of the standards that are then being applied in the internal formative meta evaluation tool, that exercise, so that there is a linkage to what that summative meta evaluation team is doing, the standards that they are using to assess the evaluation after it's completed. And that's a good way, I think, for several things. One for facilitating communication, facilitating dialogue, starting that dialogue on quality with the commissioner, and then also making a linkage to what's happening formatively and what's happening summatively, and for independent evaluators not simply to come in and as a technician and do the work as required, but to really bring to the table as a professional evaluator, that we are also, we need to be part of that discussion about what quality is, that we are engaged in that dialogue, and that we want to do, as we think about quality in the formative sense, there is a linkage to that assessment of quality in the summative sense. So this deliberate approach is one way for us as evaluators to be professionals in our work and to contribute toward the further professionalization of the field itself. Let's go to the next slide. If anyone would care, we have a few questions for reflection about this tool and whether you see it as applicable to your own practice, or not, or ways that it might be improved upon. This is a tool, as I mentioned, that was developed within the context of one complex, large-scale evaluation exercise. And we thought, well, let's think about this as applicable in other contexts as well. Would it be applicable? So if anyone has any reflection on that, that would be wonderful to hear. Another, maybe Michael, we can advance to the next slide.
Okay.
As well.
I wasn't sure. I thought I saw somebody on camera was speaking, but they were muted. So if you wanted to unmute and actually ask your question, you can do that. Otherwise, we'll keep going.
Sure.
No, it doesn't look like anyone's ready to unmute and ask.
Okay.
So we can go on
That's
to the
fine.
next question.
That's
Sure,
fine.
but
It's a
yeah.
lot to, I think, reflect and apply. Any thoughts about how or why this tool might improve practice based on your own experience, and what might be a useful aspect to it, or useful part of it, or piece to it? Any reflection on that? Excuse me. I think for us, as we were starting to think about this, my feeling as the lead evaluator in this context was, well, I kind of do this sort of maybe like unconsciously. I do think about this, but maybe not in a very deliberate way. And my initial feelings about it were like, well, is this so necessary? But I think, as I moved through the exercise, I really concluded that, well, to be deliberate about this and put some structure around how we're thinking about doing quality work, I found that useful, and that it helped me remember things as well. And as I was documenting and reflecting about how we were developing this tool and adding to it, and so this was for this reason I felt like it was something very, very positive for us in our experience.
I think it's and please, if you want to jump in with a question, unmute yourself and go ahead and drop in. This is the conversation portion of the presentation. We're kind of done. We've presented the tool. Now we're just trying to see how it lands with you. If you have any questions, any thoughts on it, so feel free to unmute and jump into the conversation. I would say that my perspective on it is how it might improve how it does and has improved our practice, is that it really did make our work more deliberate and more purposeful, and not waiting until we get halfway through the evaluation and then coming to some sort of a piece that, oh, we should have done this. It really did set up a future perspective in the early part of the design. So I have two hands came up. I know that Chimji, your hand was up first, and then we'll go to the other person's hand. Chimji, you want to?
Yes. Thank you, Amy and Dr. Harnar. So first, before this session, I was thinking meta-evaluation is evaluation of many evaluation. Like let's say I have maybe 10 evaluation reports in front of me, and then I do the quality check type of thing. But now after you go through the method and then the tools, it's like a more in-depth of one evaluation and making sure all the standard evaluation standards and the reflection moment, the reflection procedure, and all this iterative process is the kind of the methodology of meta evaluation. And then I was thinking, from the donor's perspective or the commissioner's perspective, do they include this process as a part of the job, I mean the TOR, or it's like maybe my question is like, is meta evaluation as a standalone RFP, like a request for proposal, or is it in practice a part of the general evaluation itself?
That's really good. I want to address both your statements. The first question is, it's really good that you kind of caught that many people think about meta evaluation as being like a lot of, okay, we've got 10 evaluations and we want to get the best information, see which ones are the better and learn from them. But if you think about the idea behind meta evaluation, it really is about the judgment of evaluative processes and products. And so it can be applied as small as like a stress test within a heart rate management protocol. Like, is that tool, a evaluative tool, being used to its best? Is it as well designed, and so on and so forth? So it could be as micro as an individual tool, and as macro as multiple evaluations. So really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. And the second point that you brought up about the commissioner, and it's, I think what and Amy and I talked about this quite a bit, is that oftentimes clients hire us to do our evaluation, and they assume, they expect, they expect that we will be doing the highest quality work that we're doing. So in some ways, they don't think about that individual evaluation moment of a RFP. Now, and what they often do then is they think about it after they've been doing some evaluation for some time, and they think, now, are we doing the best evaluations we should be doing? And maybe like the Swedish evaluation unit of the Doctors Without Borders that I just mentioned, after 5 or 6 years, they wanted to look back at 5 years worth of work to say, are we doing as well as we could be doing, and how can we improve it? So more often than not, you see that type of meta evaluation at a moment in time that it's important for an organization to ask these kind of questions. Or you see them in UNICEF, where they have an outside evaluation system that actually rates every single evaluation report. And so it's built into their systems that when an evaluation comes in, it automatically, the report goes out to an external set of panel who does a rating of it. So you see many different ways meta evaluation is being implemented from that perspective. I want to bring one point up before I let Amy respond to this, and that is that what we're doing a little bit with this tool is a mix between your first question and your second, right? Is the first question is that and maybe an epiphany, an idea that meta evaluation should take place in the smallest moments. And what we're saying is it really should take place in the smallest moments. And you should stand in that quality moment because it gives you more power in your negotiations with your client, because you can say, this is important to us. We want to do good work for you, but we know we're fallible. We need to be reflective. We need to have others look at our work. We need to be thoughtful about our work and not just accept that we're going to do the greatest work ever. We know that we'll need some sort of oversight, and we're going to own that. And it puts you in that position of power by owning it as early as possible and bringing that perspective to the table. Amy, do you want to add anything before we turn to the other question? Thanks for the good question, Shimji.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I guess I would point back to just in building on Michael's point, or reinforcing it, the quote that we identified of Robert Picciotto, the 2011 quote, where he talked about, well, as a knowledge profession, evaluation, there needs to be ownership over the products that we produce. And I think well, in research and evaluation, I think, or particularly research, we think of, well, okay, copyright, we need to have ownership over what we produce. But in evaluation, we don't think in those terms, that we're more process oriented. We do have a product, but of course that's not published in the same way, or we don't think about copyright of that. But when we think about, instead, I think when we think about control, I'm my own personal feeling on this is that, well, this is where we do talk about quality. This having a voice as evaluators about the quality of our work and the defining quality in our work. How do we think about that? How do we judge that quality? We really need to be at the table to speak about that. So just to sort of add to that power element that Michael refers to in the, which, given our market, the market that we work in, and that we are essentially in a pay for service, fee for service market economy of evaluation, or evaluation economy, this becomes even more important.
Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you for good questions. We have another hand up. I'm not gonna try to pronounce it, but I'll just say Usu is the first three letters. Just jump in with your question.
Good evening. So I just would like to share my impression about all the presented ideas and definitions behind evaluation information. It was truly new thing for me because I'm a junior student at the university now, and I just realized that I know all these tools by unconsciously, but I never thought about systematically by this steps by steps. And as Amy said, it was really helpful for me to understand how things work in a systematic way. And my questions are, what are some common problems occur when using these tools, and how we can be more prepared to overcome these problems? And is there any simple steps that we can do in our daily life?
Yep. Well, so Amy, maybe you can jump in with some of the some of the issues that we ran into with the client on this tool was that we were being kind of accused of being over dogmatic, too thoughtful, too many steps in the design before you actually get to work. When we were saying, oh, we want to build in all of these tools, the client was a little bit reluctant to invest in some sort of a large framework around quality when, again, it comes back to that assumption that we are going to be doing that anyway. So are we really going to pay more for you to do the work that we expect you to be doing anyway? So there's always going to be a little bit of negotiation of how much of this you can make explicit and how much of it you just work internally to do for yourself so that you can answer those questions later around the quality of your work and whether or not you have to present all of this to your client in advance. It really, that goes with experience, with kind of that social intelligence of how do you learn to be with your client and who they are and what their expectations and where their appetite is for really highly structured tools that you will be putting yourself through. So that's probably one of the things that I would say that you'd want to think about when you start to embed these kind of things in your work is, you know, learning about them, getting comfortable with them, and then deciding how much of it needs to be mentioned or provided to the client and how much of it is really just for your own internal work to improve the work you're doing and to be better and more knowledgeable about your own work.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that. That sort of social intelligence and sort of gauging the appetite of your commissioner is really very important, and sort of sensing, I think, the value that's placed on quality too, and the sort of receptiveness or the interest and the ability to talk about these issues, to talk about quality. I mean, not every commissioner has a summative meta evaluation system in place. The major ones do. The major donors in the world do. Michael mentioned UNICEF, FCDO has one, and others too. But smaller donors will not have those resources for doing that. Yes, Hanan, ILO as well. All the UN agencies have them. So it's sort of gauging the context in which you are working and the commissioner that you are working with is quite important. I think an important factor for sort of determining your approach and how the extent how you address it and how you want to use the tool. Good question.
Yep, and you kind of implied. I think, you know, your last question was like, how might we be able to embed some of these things in our daily work? And I am one, like, knowing how knowledge develops, and I've been doing this academic world for 5 or 7 years now. And what I found is that tools give us these things to then work off of. And so I like these things because they push us to think in ways that maybe our built-in frameworks might miss. And so it just opens our minds to start thinking about things more in ways that we don't necessarily normally do with our own existence. So I guess what I'm getting at is that trying out these tools on a regular basis to use them so that they become really easy and thoughtful, or not, you know, base level stuff. So you start thinking about quality, and then you can start moving into the tools more intimately and more deeply. So I guess what I'm getting at is that all these kinds of tools are just more ways to help us frame our thinking to then look for ways that we hadn't been thinking about it before. The Joint Committee on Standards for Educational Evaluation that I mentioned earlier set up the program evaluation standards. I think the first edition was in the early 80s, and the last edition is in 2010. They have 5 facets to quality, and within them, they have numerous statements that help you refine what it means to practice feasibly and propriety and accurately and useful. And then Dan Stufflebeam took those 30 statements that come out and he put 6 indicators on each of those statements. So you could actually go to a tool of 180 elements and look at every single one of them and think about your own quality. So it can get very deep very quickly. And so I think that it's worth looking at those. It's worth thinking about those, because those 180 statements will make you think about your evaluation in ways you hadn't thought of before. So I would say that's where you could start incorporating these into your work on a daily basis.
I'd suggest going to our program website, Western Michigan University Evaluation Center, and you will find many checklists. I think the one that you referenced, Michael, I'm not sure if that is there, but I think there is a meta evaluation checklist on there.
There is, but it's there isn't the most in-depth one. It's a little bit harder to find. He only published it once, and he published it as an addendum to a book on his SIP model. But there are checklists at that checklist project, lots of them around evaluation quality of all sorts. So there's checklists on reports, there's checklists on design, there's checklists on contracting, and there's even a checklist for how to write good evaluation questions, right? So it's a great tool, the Evaluation Center. If you're interested in the 180 item tool that Dan Stufflebeam created, you can email me and I'm happy to share it with you.
Was there another hand up? I thought there might have been another.
I didn't see another hand.
Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, good.
Yep. First of all, thank you for your time, and I really appreciate your thoughtful lessons. So I have 2 questions. So when is the most appropriate time to do the meta evaluation, whether it's before starting it or starting our real evaluation or after that? And if it's before, at that moment, we do not have any reference of report or finalization of the report. So in that case, what is the best reference that we can check our qualification of TOR or the evaluation methodology?
Yeah, really good questions. I think that I would say that and this is why Amy and I did this for this project, was that we both believe that doing good meta evaluation, the idea behind meta evaluation is really about holding oneself accountable to quality standards, so that when you get into practice, you're actually doing the best work that you can do. And so from that perspective, the earliest you can engage in thinking about evaluating the evaluation that you're doing, the better off you will be towards, somebody then pulls your report off the internet a year from now and looks at it against some sort of evaluation standards. If you started at the beginning of your evaluation thinking about how someone might rate your evaluation report, you will be attending to all of these questions about utility and feasibility and propriety along the way, so that when you deliver the report, there are fewer questions about the quality of your evaluation. So from my perspective, the earlier you can start thinking about this, the better. And if you are doing meta evaluation and someone asks you to meta evaluate something, then it really depends upon where they are in the process and what your role is in that process of meta evaluating. And oftentimes we get asked to come in after the fact. But if you're fortunate enough to come in early in the process, then you can really help them formatively improve their evaluation by asking some hard questions like, is this instrument going to give you the kind of evidence that you want to be able to make that claim that's attached to your evaluation question? Can you answer that evaluation question with good evidence based on this instrument that you're using. And those kind of hard questions are really important for evaluators to hear. And I was just listening to a podcast the other day about a long-time evaluator, and he said, I've been doing it for 40 years, but I try not to do it alone, because if I do it alone, I'm more likely to gloss over some of those issues of quality because it's just me and my client. But if I have a team, we keep each other accountable to highest of quality. And so the earlier you can do that, and the earlier you can embed yourself with, in that meta evaluative moment, the better for the quality of the evaluation.
There was just one, Hanan had a question, in the chat, can meta evaluation approach replace the standard OECD DAC evaluation standards or approaches in the long run? I would respond to that by saying no, I don't think so. I think meta evaluation as an approach may access those standards or criteria actually in its use, and not as a replacement of. It's more meta evaluation as a use, as a functional, as a process oriented with the objective to pass a judgment on an evaluative exercise or product, with the use of certain standards, which may then be drawn from the OECD DAC. If I understood that question correctly, Hanan.
Yeah, I think that's a good take on it, is really that in meta evaluation, because we see it in so many different disciplines and so many different domains, it really it is a higher level of thought than the OECD DAC standards and criteria. That they may be useful as a tool within a meta evaluative approach, but not necessarily be subsumed. I see a hand up from Oyuna. I know we're on our hour-and-a-half time, but let's see what Oyuna, want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, it's a very, very in-depth presentation about evaluation, since our evaluation is pretty new in our country, and our Evaluations Association is also pretty new. Yeah, you just mentioned that there's like a 180 checklists that you recommended us to check, and the meta evaluation. I just wonder, because the scope is so big, does it only evaluate the goals or results only, or does it kind of check whether that evaluation covered gender responsiveness or transformativeness or decolonization, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question, Oyu. I would say that like in evaluation, where evaluation can be gender responsive focused, it can be culturally focused. Evaluation has the ability to take on the issues around which they're asked to evaluate. So, there's lots of environments and contexts these days that require a gender-focused lens on evaluation. Meta-evaluation is not different than that, in that who's commissioning it may set the context and say, we are, so like when I mentioned the Doctors Without Borders, Medicine Sans Frontiers, about meta-evaluation I did, we were evaluating evaluations in an evaluation system that its focus was on medical humanitarian aid. So while there's a really strong focus of just evaluation quality there, because that's the baseline, we're doing evaluation, it was set within a medical humanitarian perspective, and therefore we added another set of criteria that were humanitarian aid evaluation standards. So we had both basic evaluation standards, and then we had humanitarian based standards. And so what I'm getting at is that the meta evaluation, like evaluation itself, can bring to table the criteria needed to do good work around an evaluation in almost any context by using standards and criteria and standards that exist within the discipline around which that evaluation is taking place. So if you're in working on a number of evaluations that were focused on gender responsive evaluation or gender responsive programming, and the evaluations had a gender responsive lens to it, then you would certainly, maybe as a baseline always, the program evaluation standards are one lens, but then on top of that lens is a gender responsive set of criteria that help you assess those evaluations as well. So it is as versatile as evaluation itself.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Amy, thanks for putting the checklist link in the chat to the Western Michigan Evaluation Center. You can find a whole bunch of useful tools there.
Okay, any more questions from the participants?
Wow,
Okay.
sounds like we have a quiet, quiet. Go ahead, you want to wrap us up?
Then we can close today's presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Michael and Ms. Amy, on behalf of Mongolian Evaluation Association and all the attendees. We learned a lot on the quality as praxis, a tool for formative meta-evaluation. We really appreciate you for sharing with us your knowledge and expertise, giving comprehensive answers to our questions, and of course, the resource links. So thank you also the attendees for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you so much. Happy to be here. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.